I think it's time now to move to our third panel, the last panel of this conference, learning throughout the policy cycle and how ex-post evaluation can contribute to EU policies for a better future. This panel should make the link between ex-post and ex-ante impact assessment and actual decision-making on new or amending legislation. It's about the learning from the past and for the future, and how to translate these experiences and findings into new legislation with the aim of getting better laws for a better future, and what this means in practice and how it can be done. My colleague Mena Fernandez will moderate this panel. For those who do not know Mena yet, Mena is an economist with a BA from the University of Chicago and a PhD in policy analysis from the Bardi Grant Graduate School in Santa Monica, California. I have to say this because I would love to go to Santa Monica, California, rather today than tomorrow. She is working now as a policy analyst in our European Added Value Unit, where she carries out analysis to support the agenda-setting function of the European Parliament. This includes European added value assessments and cost of non-Europe reports on various topics such as gender-based violence, legal migration, investment schemes, corruption, care work, and health. Most recently, she coordinated the unit's flagship publication, Mapping. It was called the 10 Ways that Europe could do more for you, mapping the cost of non-Europe, which has just been published very recently, and it's worthwhile having a look at. Together with a couple of other renowned experts, Mena will keep us entertained for the following 1.5 hours. So it was supposed to be 2 hours, but it will be a little less, 2 hours, 45 minutes or so. I'm looking forward to that. Mena, over to you. And everybody, please come up to the nice podium.
Thank you. Great. Thank you and good morning. Welcome to session 3 of the conference. And I'd like to start by taking a step back, invite you to take a bit of time travel to yesterday, because session 3 is building on session 1 and 2 of yesterday. And I'd like to take you back to the opening remarks made by Vice President Mark Engel. And he shared a quote, and I would like to regift it to you today. He used a quote from the great Jacques Delors, and the quote is this in French, that Europe, il faut les pompiers, mais aussi les architectes. In English, Europe needs not only the firefighters, but also the architects. And I think this is a wonderful analogy, because we here are the architects. That's what I understood it to mean. We who are working on better lawmaking and policies. And we're not only building new buildings, we are also looking at the buildings that exist to see what is wrong, how we can make it better for the storms that are coming today, tomorrow, and in the future. And so it's about how we can make policies stronger, how we can make them good, not just for some of us, but for all of us, for women, for vulnerable groups, for vulnerable regions, and for everybody. So here today, I have a very distinguished panel who will take us into this with evaluation, because evaluation is about this. It's about looking at what we have in place and to understand what lessons can we draw to make the policies better for us and the future generations. So to kick it off, I'll turn it over to Paul, who is an associate professor at Maastricht University. He is a political scientist, and he's an expert in audit and accountability of EU policies. We had a nice discussion yesterday about research he did at the European Court of Auditors. He's been in the archives there to do his research. It must have been very interesting. And I'll be very interested to hear about what he has to share about this and his other research. The European Court of Auditors was set up in 1977, by the way, at the initiative of the European Parliament. And it was made a EU institution in 1993, was it? In Maastricht. So fascinating. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We decided to try to make this a little bit interactive, so today I'll throw a few questions at you. The session today is learning throughout the policy cycle. How can ex post evaluation contribute to EU policies for a better future? And I thought, first of all, we might just unpack those terms. What do we mean by learning? What do we mean by ex post evaluation? I think, first of all, when we talk about ex post evaluation, we're using that as a loose umbrella term. We need to think about an amalgam of evaluation products, from ex post evaluation research outsourced to consultants, to commissioned staff working documents, to ECA special reports, performance audits, and of course the research and studies commissioned by the EP policy directorates, the work of the EPRS itself. All of this is valuable input and can come under the umbrella of ex post evaluation. I want to also think about learning. I mean, when we're talking about learning here, who should be learning from ex post evaluation? What type of learning should we be striving for? The Better Regulation document refers specifically to organisational learning, but as we know, every EU institution comprises a number of organisations, from policy directorates to units, secretariats general, committees. Where should learning be stressed? Should it be among the desk office administrators managing policies and programmes who have insights into the intricacies of project interventions? Or should it be high level among the commissioners, director generals, legal services drafting new legislation? Or should it be with the MEPs within the committee system who are politically accountable, who scrutinise policy and legislative performance? Should learning be focused on enhancing policy knowledge of elected officials and strengthening accountability and oversight? Or beyond the EU institutions, should we be trying to optimise learning within national parliaments, within subnational layers of government, or among street-level actors who are actually doing policy on the ground? So there are lots of questions there, and maybe we need nuanced approaches to actually engaging these actors in learning and communicating the results of ex post evaluation. Do we want incremental learning, social learning, political learning? I was going to just talk briefly today then about some of the achievements, I think, because I'm opening this panel, and I think it's important also to acknowledge some of the achievements that have been made in recent years in the field of ex post evaluation, before we then outline some of the challenges. So, as you know, the 2021 Better Regulation communication, and you may also have seen the July 2023 toolbox of 614 pages with ample guidance on ex post evaluation there in Chapter 6. It reiterates the call for evidence-informed policy-making, a stronger approach to stakeholder consultation, and indeed the integration of strategic foresight. And I think this is an achievement in itself. At last, in the EU, we're taking ex post evaluation seriously. It was always the poorer sister of ex-ante impact assessments, which were the basis for policy-making. And ex post evaluation was often ignored. There wasn't an obligation to conduct it. It wasn't a statutory part of the legislative cycle. So I think already better regulation is an achievement. There's a commitment to actually conduct ex post evaluation. And as Claudio said, evaluate first. So this focus, the better regulation agenda has reinforced this focus on learning by joining up the stages of the policy cycle so that lessons from policy analysis and evaluation feed in to policy reformulation. There's a legal commitment, a clear rationale to do so, to make policy more efficient and effective. I wonder how evaluation first is going. Is it actually feeding in sequentially, chronologically, into ex-ante impact assessment, or are these things actually happening in parallel, I wonder? We see some other achievements. The European Commission has taken greater ownership of ex-post evaluation. It no longer considers the outsourced ex-post evaluation as the final product, but integrates work commissioned to third parties. It does quality checks. It produces a staff working document. This has arguably bolstered the potential for learning. There's quality control. There's integration of these evaluations alongside the Commission's own work. is a better product and a product that's more conducive to learning, both within the European Commission and externally. We've also seen through the Better Regulation agenda the harmonisation of evaluation practice with the introduction of common evaluation criteria: effectiveness, efficiency, relevance, coherence, value added. And this allows for more comparability of evaluation findings across policy areas by taking a similar perspective on the ways in which we gauge policy performance. What is success? What is failure? And how do we look at that? So from an ad hoc and rather decentralised approach, we now have a common approach to gauging legislative and policy performance. And if we turn to the European Court of Auditors that Mina mentioned, another important actor, we've also seen in recent years performance audits, which are they're complementary to ex-post evaluations in the providing valuable insights into the performance of EU legislation and how the EU budget has been spent. These provide valuable judgments on the 3 E's of effectiveness, economy and efficiency, and provide useful narratives around the performance of EU legislation from which we can learn. These often high-quality reports on complex and timely topics provide ample recommendations for the Commission. And many of these recommendations are taken on board to improve legislation and policy. And if we think about transparency but also learning, I think one of the triumphs here is the fact that you can actually see the recommendations and the Commission replies at the back of these special reports. I think that's also very conducive to learning within institutions and beyond. And another innovation, of course, we've seen in recent years is the European Court of Auditors going directly, obviously its first port of call is the Budgetary Control Committee, but going directly to the policy committees with their performance audits, so that committees themselves can also learn from evaluative work on how legislation has fared, how the budget was spent, what can be approved. So I think in terms of, lesson drawing for MEPs within committee work, that's been another important innovation. And of course, let's acknowledge the role of the EPRS here, our hosts today, the impressive contribution that the EPRS has also made and continues to make to support learning and transfer of knowledge across the European Parliament, monitoring evaluations, synthesising information, making it more accessible and user-friendly through rolling checklists and other materials supporting the scrutiny work of the EP. And of course, we've seen innovations with the Regulatory Scrutiny Board that Claudia mentioned. It has built up extensive experience in overseeing impact assessment, but now has competencies in legislative evaluation and actually reviews staff working documents and ex-post evaluations, not necessarily systematically, but occasionally. So that's also another actor there helping to monitor the quality control of evaluation, ex-post evaluation. And we've seen a number of innovations, the interinstitutional agreement on better lawmaking, and greater coordination, perhaps, between the Court of Auditors, the Commission and the Parliament in terms of sharing work plans, scheduling, providing more foresight, so that evaluation products are delivered in a timely manner for committee workshops and hearings and for other events. So, cultivating better interinstitutional relations. But I think there are a number of challenges and opportunities still when it comes to practice in ex-post evaluation. How to ensure better timing, of course, is the one big question, and I think we were discussing that yesterday. We know that traditionally ex-post evaluation is delivered beyond the 7-year programming period, which poses a real challenge for learning and policy redesign in the subsequent programming period. There's often a reliance on midterm evaluations. I've always wondered why we have these 7-year programming periods back-to-back with programming and spending continuously. What if we had a 10-year programming period with 18 months either side, a buffer zone to really work on ex-post evaluation and ensure that that ex-post work feeds into new policy programming to create a real space for ex-post evaluation? How can we also ensure closer monitoring and better data collection? The Better Regulation agenda states that monitoring is crucial in the policy cycle and requires the systematic collection of data. There are monitoring and review clauses in legislation meant to ensure that the necessary data is collected and evaluated, but we know that this is timely and costly. We heard yesterday about the eternal problem of ensuring adequate baseline data when we're making legislation and policy. And I know colleagues here are involved in setting up and improving frameworks for monitoring legislation in the Commission. How can we also ensure the greater take-up of ex-post evaluation findings? One of the big issues in the evaluation literature is use or non-use. Now, of course, there may be political contestation around evaluation findings, but what can we do practically to make future ex post evaluations more digestible and more impactful? The Better Regulation Agenda states that evaluation reports should be transparent, objective, and a balanced presentation of the evaluation process, evidence, and analysis. They should be concise. They should be non-technical, accessible to non-experts, and self-standing. They should provide sufficient detail to enable the reader to follow the evidence and logic, and to understand conclusions without looking at any further material. So what incentives can we think to encourage evaluation use? Should a future Better Regulation toolbox offer more guidance to citizens on how to read evaluations, how to draw lessons from findings? Should we give more guidance to enable readers to deconstruct evaluation reports? Maybe there's something here for DG Communications. How can we communicate even executive summaries in a more interactive way for the citizen? Another question, this is very much related, is how to ensure adequate dissemination of ex post evaluations. The Better Regulation Toolbox provides 9 key steps in evaluation, and the last one states, disseminate the evaluation findings as appropriate and identify any appropriate follow-up actions to put into practice the lessons learned, capitalize on the evaluation findings. Now, this means feeding in findings into the decision-making cycle, into annual activity reports, into annual management plans, to impact assessments. But beyond the EU, how can we use media and social media better to disseminate results of ex post evaluation to those who might learn? By which I mean also just simply be informed of what EU policy has achieved. So how can we bring ex post evaluation more into the European public sphere? How to learn from citizens and incorporate direct experience of legislation on the ground into evaluation. Now, one of the achievements, of course, recently we've seen the institutionalization of an evaluation cycle, which means that now there are several moments for stakeholder consultation, both open and targeted consultation, to feed into ex post evaluation processes. Now, this is an opportunity to learn from citizens, for those who have benefited from policy or bore the brunt of bad policy. One of the challenges I know for the Commission, with these open consultation procedures is they're often monopolised by third-party interests. And how can we really harness the lessons and experiences of citizens on the ground? And I think these questions strike at the heart of notions of participatory democracy and the throughput legitimacy of the policy process. How to design evaluations to optimize policy learning while making them future-oriented. We know that evaluation is hugely expensive. Every question we ask comes at a cost of tens of thousands of pounds, realistically. To what extent should we incorporate Foresight into ex post evaluation design? And what questions should we ask? How do we adapt evaluation research design, analytical frameworks, methodologies to encourage evaluation findings that don't only look retrospectively? It might seem like a little bit of an oxymoron, ex post evaluation that looks forwards, but that doesn't only look retrospectively at what took place yesterday, but how policy performance yesterday is relevant to tomorrow. So in light of yesterday's discussion on Foresight, when designing evaluation questions, how might we also look to the future? Might we ask, to what extent is the intervention likely to remain relevant? To what extent is the intervention likely to remain coherent? To what extent is it likely to continue to represent EU added value if we continue with the intervention? In short, rather than interrogating simply past performance and the link between impacts and results and original policy objectives and desired impacts, might we also use ex post evaluation as a future-looking exercise without impacting on or duplicating impact assessment work, ex ante work? So how to make ex post evaluation more dynamic, more responsive, more future-oriented. And one thing Claudia picked up on, of course, is experimentation. We mustn't kill experimentation. We have these two things. We have harmonization of evaluation practice, but we need to still encourage experimentation in evaluation research design. And my final point, how can we better manage, store, and retrieve ex post evaluations? This is a very practical thing. This is about knowledge management and learning. Finding EU evaluations is not easy. Yeah? It has long relied on search functions of the EU Publications Office website, the section on evaluation and studies. We now have this innovation with the Have Your Say website, now used to store all planned and completed evaluations, supposedly, though it's not necessarily arguably been implemented in the most systematic way. Visibility, I think, is still hindered. What if we had an evaluations register, like we have a transparency register, a proper repository? You know, this is evaluation work funded by the taxpayer. It should all be in a single repository, but all public funded evaluations can be easily found. This would arguably promote learning and encourage the use of evaluation at lower levels of governance. Better knowledge management would arguably ensure learning as well as transparency and encourage citizen engagement. And indeed, the 2021 Communication on Better Regulation called for action in this area. Now, I think having put a few questions out to the audience, I think I'll end there and hand over to my colleagues. I look forward to also following the innovations in the management and organisation of ex-post evaluation in the institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was excellent. And thank you for making all the connections with yesterday's presentations as well as Professor Radeli's this morning. It was really wonderful. I like this point about the taxpayer being the one who pays for evaluation. So in the end, we are also responsible to the citizens. So this is a wonderful point, and you gave us many ideas for how we can improve our work. So thanks. We will now move over to Emmanuel, who's coming to us from the EIB, the European Investment Bank. He is the head of the evaluation division there, and in his role, he helps to ensure that EIB can be held accountable to its stakeholders and also identify ways to improve the work of the EIB. So thank you very much, Emmanuel, for being here with us today. And could we start, perhaps you can tell the audience and us here a bit about the European Investment Bank and the role of the evaluation division.
Thank you, Mina. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, and I must have learned a lot from yesterday and today, and there are many of your questions which indeed resonate to me, and maybe I will have a few contributions to share with you. A few words about the EIB. So as you know, it's the financial arm of the European Union. It is made of shareholders, being the EU member states, and basically the evaluation function is primarily meant to address the information needs of its shareholders, namely the EIB board of directors. The EIB is a policy-driven organization, meaning that we don't define the policy. This institution and the Commission define the orientations, and we convert these policy objectives into tangible investments, into co-financing projects which are the most conducive for converting a policy objective into tangible projects for the citizen. So basically, we are a project-based organization. Last year, we financed about 900 projects for about 72 billion euro in 1 year. So this makes the EIB the largest donor, and the largest donor indeed worldwide, much bigger than the World Bank worldwide. 90% of our activities are within the EU, and 10% are outside of the EU. And indeed, to implement our projects, we have to be in line with policy objectives that we define for ourselves. So it's in relation to innovation, support to SMEs, support to sustainable cities, as well as, of course, climate. We are the EU Climate Bank, and we implement actions for that, and we are currently evaluating how the EIB is achieving this goal. And we are also the Cohesion Bank, because cohesion was in the DNA of the EIB for decades. We used to be called in the 60s the Mezzogiorno Bank, because this is a core part of our activities. Now, about evaluation at the EIB, so we are 22 staff, and we have a quite different model in terms of how we undertake evaluation and how we plan them as compared to other EU organizations. So there's no obligation to evaluate each project or each strategy, but we at the evaluation division select relevant evaluations based on the benefit that these evaluations could bring for the organization to learn and to be better accountable for the board, for the citizen, and of course for the parliament as well, because we, as the EIB, present also on a yearly basis our activities to the parliament. So we have a 3-year rolling program which defines what we want to evaluate in the 3 years to come. Maybe I'll come back to the concept of rolling program, which is related to the need for us to be also agile and to adapt to new demands or new contexts as they emerge. And by definition, evaluation has to be independent. So we are an independent but internal evaluation function. Independence in our context means that we don't commission evaluations to be undertaken by consultants. We do evaluations ourselves, but we have within our organization behavioral independence. I mean, we have as a mission, as a profession, to be not subject to interference. We also have a series of principles and an evaluation policy which guarantees that we are free to say what we have to say, and our reports are discussed by management and shared with the board without any change, and they are all public. And of course, there are elements related to also avoidance of conflict of interest and other aspects. And we work with consultants to help us undertake our evaluations, but we ourselves define our approach, define our methods, and draft our reports and present them to our board.
Thanks so much for all this information. You said 900 projects and 22 staff, right? That's a lot. I am an economist, but I have to make that division. It's a lot of evaluations. Or can you tell us what goes into this checklist? Are all the projects evaluated, or you do a share? How do you select what goes into the checklist?
There's no obligation within the organization to evaluate all the projects. So our internal services undertake monitoring and project completion reports of the projects, but these are the services in line. While we at the EIB used in the past to evaluate a sample of these projects, but we realized that, that was not the most useful for our board. What's really useful is to help the board decide on the longer term orientations and to help the board learn from the activities to help define new strategies. So more and more, we undertake what we call thematic evaluations, which look overall at broader topics. Let me give you an example. About 4 years ago, we evaluated EIB support to cohesion. Once again, the DNA of the EIB is to support cohesion regions. What we call cohesion regions, which is the less developed regions within the EU. And instead of looking at the selection of projects, we looked at how the EIB was approaching this high-level objective, defining the treaties, in terms of defining its missions in comparison to the other players also active in that field, selecting the right projects, making sure that when we support a project in these regions, we bring something different, we bring something more that is going to support, to benefit to these regions and help them catch up with the rest of the EU, and how we monitor to learn the activities. We found that there was a lot of work to be done by the EIB, beyond counting how much money it invests in these regions. There was a lot more to be done in terms of the narrative, in terms of positioning ourselves. So we had very strong recommendations on that, to really do more in terms of explaining what we do and measuring and learning. And based on that, the EIB came with cohesion orientations, which define much more clearly now where they want to go, where they want to invest, and what part of the business they want to do in that field. So really moving away from only looking at projects to look more at our core ambitions and trying to combine looking at the projects and the overall approach of the EIB to really bring some more strategic findings.
Thanks so much, Emmanuel. This is very interesting, and it sounds like the process you have of internal and expertise, internal and external, allows you to present the information which can then be taken up. So this is great, and thanks for also sharing the example. In the interest of time, we will move to our third speaker, Raquel, who is coming to us from the Commission. She's a head of unit in DG Reform and is in charge of the technical support instrument, which is part of the multi-annual financial framework. In her role, she covers a broad terrain, She's involved in planning, legal affairs, interinstitutional relations, both with international organizations and member states, and of course, implementation and evaluation. Raquel, we're so pleased to have you with us today. Thank you so much. And yes, could you tell us a bit more about your role? What does DG Reform do? What is the evaluation function? Thanks. Sure, no problem. Go for it.
So, good morning. It's handy here because I will run a PowerPoint presentation. So, dear Mena, dear colleagues in this round table, dear audience, those here and also online, thank you. My first words are actually to the European Parliament and for having me, for inviting me for this very interesting and timely conference. And in this panel, I hope I will give you a good overview about a concrete program. Professor Radaeli already mentioned about the importance of the policy cycle and the continuous evaluation. I believe my example that I will walk you through will be really concrete in terms of a program. And to start, because Mena, you mentioned DG Reform. It's one of the most recent DGs created during this mandate. And then my case will be about, and I already apologize for using some abbreviations, not many, but I will have, it's unavoidable. And my case will be about the technical support instrument, the so-called TSI. And I will start just for having a bit of flavor. Who is familiar with the TSI? Who have already heard about TSI? Please raise the hand. Okay, it's very good. It was, there was a regulation to create the TSI, obviously with the support from the Parliament. So yes, but I will then go through the different stages. So now I'm not going to use the PowerPoint, but later on. Indeed, so I represent the European Commission. I come from DG Reform, and we are not a big DG, and we help member states to deliver on their reforms. We support reforms in member states, namely those linked to the implementation of the RRPs, the Reform and Resilience programs in the member states. And then we are in charge of implementing the technical support instrument, this TSI. It was, it came to life already in 2021, and is a program that is part of the MFF and that is managed by the Commission. And actually, this program is a bit different from others because this is it's demand-driven from the member states, and there are no co-funding, no co-financing from the member states, and indeed it covers a wide range of policy areas, so from climate to digital to health, and as I said before, it also supports the RRP's implementation. Yeah, so now about evaluation in DG Reform. And as I said, we are aligned, so we are under the framework of the MFF program, so the multi-annual financial framework. And like that, we follow exactly the same cycle, the same policy or program cycle to define and to frame all our evaluations. And of course, also our specific evaluations, the indicators that we need to look at are also included in our own regulation. And the timings are quite well known in advance. And overall, the timing is quite similar to all these spending programs that are part of the MFF. We are, and now I zoom into concrete, as I said before, the concrete evaluations that I think are very good examples of the discussion today, this morning. So the midterm evaluation, which generally are scheduled to be delivered around the fourth year of this program period, which is is happening right now, and as well the ex post evaluations that always happen once the program ends. But in our example of the TSI, we do have a recent ex post evaluation that came from the predecessor program before this TSI. There was another program, and we published last year, 2023, the ex post evaluation of the previous program, which actually feeds into the current one. So yes, I will then focus on these two dimensions. I will just share my PowerPoint. No, but it's not, it's already advancing too much. Voila, yeah. Of course, the PowerPoint will be available. Okay, so there are two main strands of the evaluation work in DG reform at project level, and then at the program level, at the level of the so-called TSI, the technical support instrument. At project level, we do evaluate all the projects. So, of course, it's important, it's mandatory, and every project we do an evaluation. My colleagues already mentioned, and Paul, you also mentioned about the evaluation and the importance to make this available. I will show you at the very end. We do have a website where we make available all the evaluations that we do, and also when we have external studies and external evaluations, this is also can be easily traceable and find it. So, any project, doesn't matter the duration, doesn't matter the area, we have an evaluation for that, and obviously everything feeds into the project level. So we have our own mechanism to gather feedback from the member states, the beneficiary authorities, those that are implementing the projects, the providers that are delivering the projects. So we do have our own mechanisms to gather feedback and to access the outputs and the outcomes achieved by individual projects. And just some examples of outcomes that we do have to be more concrete. We did help achieve, for instance, the reform of the judicial system in Cyprus. So we provided our support and we went through the evaluation scale, and we have an example of outcomes there. The data-driven system for tax evasion analysis in Italy, it's another example of a project where we do have evaluation of outcomes. And just another example, a setup of the Hellenic Development Bank in Greece. So yeah, we are talking about concrete things. So how we do that? We do have evidence, satisfaction and outcome questionnaires, data and findings are collected through these project evaluation mechanisms and then feed into the overall program evaluation. So it's a continuous, I think Professor Raquel also spoke about this continuous. It's a really good example of how this happens in practice. Then we move to the specific program level evaluation, yes. So how we do and what are the main provisions, the main pieces for the evaluation of the TSI. We do have the criteria, the evaluation criteria, the relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, coherence, and the EU add value. And this is of course in our, includes specific articles on monitoring and evaluation in our own regulation. I'm sorry, I know you cannot read, but it's just to exemplify that it's really our article 16 that stipulates so how and what we should evaluate. And then we are bound to, also there are specific articles for that, we are bound to prepare a midterm evaluation and then an ex post evaluation. Yes, coming to the midterm evaluation, that's exactly where we are now. We are preparing, it has already been launched with all the internal work. We are conducting an external independent study that will support our midterm evaluation, and very soon we will launch the open public consultation. So it's the publication of, we are open to feedback from citizens, civil society, everyone. So it will be public in the website. So here about the midterm evaluation, the scope that we will cover will be the recent, let's say, the last 3 years of implementation of the program, since it started in 2021 until 23, and in total we will cover 610 projects in all member states, in 27 member states. As I said, so we are really about to launch the open public consultation, and I already invite you all to have a look and to contribute. And yes, and the criteria that will guide our evaluation are the ones that are identified there. Okay, so I have another slide. It's a bit more complex, but just to walk you through the different use of the evaluation along the programming cycle. I mean, these program evaluations allows us to assess whether our funding delivers as expected, remains relevant, and is fit for purpose. It's also a very good opportunity to engage with stakeholders and with the public, as I just explained. Evaluations do provide the necessary evidence. From one side, the accountability, it's on the right side of the slide. So there we checked whether the money is well spent and delivers add value. We use performance indicators and reporting for internal and external audiences, like the annual activity report. It was already mentioned this morning. We have our annual TSI implementation report, and then every year our Commissioner Ferreira, comes to the Parliament to inform about this implementation report. We have the program performance overview. Yeah. And we do also regularly publish information in our website, you will see. And exactly, to be super correct, so our annual implementation report is submitted both to the European Parliament and to the Council, of course. So we continue along the cycle, and there is also, this evaluation is also a good opportunity for learning and for adjustment. And it's basically through the different projects, the different learning from the projects, that we are constantly updating and reflecting in the projects to come. We use project logic frameworks. So it's language for those that work in evaluation is very familiar. So that's what we use in our projects. And we use the SMART objectives. So every project needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And yeah, and we do also measure the performance of the project. Now I move, and there is, of course, the impact assessment part. And it's very important to gather the evidence base then to support the decision-making. For the current TSI program, we did have an ex-ante study together with the other programs, and we expect, when we will be invited to present after this MFF, so to the future MFF, to again go and run another impact assessment. And now I'm about to finish. Yes, just I wouldn't like to finish just giving you a concrete example, because I promised in the beginning that I would be very specific, and that's exactly the ex-post evaluation. So what is this about? We did publish a staff working document. There is this report with the outcomes of the ex-post evaluation. Again, there is an abbreviation. This SRSP stands for Structural Reform Support Program. That is the predecessor of the TSI. So that's how it was in the previous financial framework. And we had the conclusions of the ex-post evaluation published last, I think, October 23. And there is a set of recommendations, and right now, for the program that we run right now, we take all the lessons learned without exception. And for instance, I take only one example, the second, so these 12 lessons learned have been grouped in around 4 groups of conclusions, of recommendations. For instance, I pick on the cross-country dimension. So what that means, of course, in the previous program, it was identified that this cross-country dimension was not that present, and precisely, we are doing this now. We took this lesson, and as I said, you may remember at the beginning I said that this TSI is demand-driven from the member states, but of course we have a dialogue with them, we have coordinating authorities in all the member states with whom we speak regularly, and we looked at this and we said, okay, we really need to do something to emphasize better the cross-country dimension. And with that in mind, we have more and more multi-country projects. It's not just one country, it's not just, for instance, Italy that comes with one project, but since many other countries, member states, find, but this project that my neighbor country, my colleagues are doing, it's also very interesting for us. And for instance, we do also a lot on public administration. Right now it's very interesting developing artificial intelligence in public administration. Just one specific tiny example. And where we see more and more member states are putting multi-country requests. So that's a concrete example that an ex-post evaluation does work and does have an impact. Yeah, so I'm really about to conclude, and just where are we? So the overall timeline. Yes, so still in this salmon color, still a lot that comes from the structural reform support program for the past that we still use, and it continues to be relevant. That's the cycle, that's what it is. Right now, we are very much hands-on on the midterm evaluation. We have to do also an ex-post evaluation of the TSI later on, maybe around 2030, so still some time to go. And in parallel, maybe soon, there will be the launching for requests for the impact assessments to the new MFF, and we hope we will be part of that. So thank you for your attention, and I hope it was a good perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raquel, for the excellent intervention. It's very interesting. And so the midterm evaluation will then be feeding into the new program then, if I understand right. Okay. And that will be available online when, did you say? Is there a target date?
We have to publish it, so it's also in the regulation, by 20th February 2025. So we even know the date. So by then, it needs to be out. We would love to get it even before, because it will be the new institutional cycle, will be the new commission, the new parliament. We will see. But as already some mentioned before me, it's true that evaluation takes time, and we have the timings are coming from the better regulation and toolbox, and there's sometimes some corners we cannot cut. But overall, we are very optimistic, and I would really call on all of the colleagues to contribute through the public consultation that we will launch soon.
Great, thanks again. And I would like to take a pause maybe now to see if there's any questions in the audience, because we've heard 3 excellent interventions, and perhaps there's a question on, I think online.
I will have a question to colleagues, because we heard yesterday that we live now in a context of polycrisis. So crisis is always going to be there. The question is how organizations are agile to address the crisis, and how evaluations are agile as well. I heard concepts related to reactivity, responsiveness, agility. But still, when I see your criteria and our criteria, I mean, the evaluation criteria, it's still about the same criteria: relevance, effectiveness, coherence, sustainability. But these aspects related to agility, responsiveness are not there. Maybe it's time to consider adding this set of criteria as the core, in the core set of evaluation criteria, because crises are always going to be there, and what should define our approach is to be agile and to be responsive to this crisis. What's your view on that?
Oh, excellent question. Anyone would like to take that? Maybe Paul, you have a thought too? I see you thinking over there. So
I'm just thinking about the way in which institutions themselves need to become more agile and responsive. And I know that, I mean, thinking about the European Court of Auditors recently, internal reforms to try to get over the siloing of auditors within different chambers, trying to pool experts and auditors so that people can react, that an institution can act quickly in commissioning a new evaluation or a performance audit, so that we can be more responsive and act quickly rather than taking 18 months. So, yeah, I think there's probably work to do in every institution to be more agile. This concept of polycrisis. And, of course, this also poses challenges for accountability of the way in which we spend money when we're channeling money very quickly into financial instruments and legal instruments without necessarily perhaps appropriate ex-ante work. Polycrisis is a real challenge.
thanks a lot. And any reflections from the audience? Any question? I see one over here. Thanks.
Good morning, Hugh Badali from the Ex-Post Evaluation Unit in the European Parliament. I'd like to go back to something Mr. Stephenson mentioned, the timing of evaluations. And in our unit, very often we have conversations, even differences of opinion about this. Too early, and there is not sufficient data, or too late to have an impact on the policy cycle. I don't know whether the panel has any insights on the matter.
Thanks for the question. Someone would like to take this one? Raquel, you mentioned a bit about timing with the and also for the rolling checklist, it's also 3 years. So if you want to explain a bit more, or
indeed. I mean, in terms of timings, as I said, everything is very defined by the better regulation toolbox and already in the regulations of the specific program. So in our case, so we are right now preparing this midterm evaluation. So there's a whole process. So everything needs to start more than a year in advance. So when it comes to the ex post, as I said, the importance of it, there's not much we can change in terms of the different time horizons and the time consuming that the evaluations represent. That's how it is. Also because the consultation process is becoming more and more important. And for instance, I don't want to deviate the conversation a lot, but that's precisely where we are right now. So we already decided our questionnaire. We wanted to put it out, and my colleagues are here with me today, they know. But now we need to translate everything in all the languages. So it's time consuming and for a reason, and sometimes for a very good reason. So things really take time. But when it comes to the ex post evaluation, we always need to think about it. The ex post, okay, that's the term. So it's really looking at back looking. But it's a lot about forward looking. A lot of the outcomes are very important for what is happening right now in the program to adjust and in a way to bring some agility into that and to use all these elements that we have available. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Anything else? No. Okay, so then let's move to also in the interest of time, let's move to our next speaker. We're going to move now to the national parliamentary setting, specifically to the Tweede Kamer. Did I say that right? The House of Representatives in the Netherlands. Sandor here to my left works in the analysis and research department. He's a lawyer by training, and he's also outside of his responsibilities at the Parliament. He's also a professor of constitutional and administrative law at the Free University of Amsterdam. So, Sandor, thanks so much for being with us today and for sharing your insider view on how evaluation works in the Parliament. Thank you. Will you be sitting here?
I'll be sitting here.
Let me give some slides as well.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mina, for this very kind introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here today in this setting. to talk about evaluation. Now, I don't work in evaluation myself because I work in the national parliament. In the parliamentary system, I think our Belgian colleague explained it very well yesterday, where it's the government that is where all the where the evaluation work is being done, and then there's a whole world of advisory institutions around that who play a role in that. So what I would like to do is to say a couple of things about what the Dutch National Parliament, the Tweede Kamer, which is the lower house, is doing to get a little bit of a grip on what is going on in the policy cycle and how evaluation plays a role in that. I was going to do this presentation together with my colleague Nils DONKER, as you can see in the program. He unfortunately couldn't be here today, so I will do my best to fill his shoes and to do his part of the evaluation of the presentation as well. So prepared a PowerPoint presentation to take you through it. There we go. To start off with, this will probably be very familiar in general terms with you, the policy cycle, and to say a little bit about what the government has been doing in this area to improve the evaluation system. Already back in 2017, the government launched a government-wide program to get better insights into the impact of policy, and also to pay more attention to intern learning. And as part of this program, a couple of years later, 2021, the government introduced the so-called Strategic Evaluation Agenda, basically meant to schedule evaluations in a more coherent way. And it sort of implicitly follows the policy cycle. And the idea is that for each budget item, each policy theme, there's a schedule with each relevant evaluation for the coming years. And for each evaluation, it is described what the specific topic is and what the main question is that should be answered. Now, and ideally, this schedule, this agenda should contain all the planned ex ante, ex durante, and ex post evaluations. It is still fairly new, as I said. This strategic evaluation agenda was introduced in 2021. So this is not yet the case everywhere, but this is also something that we, from our perspective, keep an eye on, so to say. Now, this strategic evaluation agenda is included in the appendix in the annual budget that the government presents to Parliament. So it is something that comes to Parliament every year. And in addition, I should say, by law, the government is required to provide a proper substantiation and also an evaluation plan for each and every policy initiative or legislative proposal that it presents to Parliament. And of course, proper substantiation or explanation of a new program with concrete objectives, policy objectives, obviously makes evaluation much easier. Now, moving to Parliament. Oh no, we're moving to restarting our computer. But moving to Parliament, because we haven't been sitting around and taking a look only at what the government is doing, but more or less alongside this government initiative to get better insight into policy through evaluation, over the past couple of years, our Parliament has also introduced a couple of new instruments, new parliamentary instruments, to get a better grip on the impact of policy and legislation. Most of which are the result of the work of political working groups in Parliament that were created to look into how Parliament's role can be strengthened in certain areas. We've also had a couple of rapporteurs who've been very active in this field in thinking of how can Parliament improve its function in this policy cycle, so to say. And I'll elaborate on 4 of these new instruments. You can see them in yellow on the screen, very briefly to take you along the trail of what we do and what we work on in practice. And this is by no means sort of a complete overview of what Parliament does. Obviously, there's much more. There's hearings, there's expert meetings, there's everything that a Parliament normally does. But these are a couple of sort of extra things that have been developed over the past couple of years. Now, to start with the first one, the scientific assessment. It's a new instrument, and you can say, in addition to the strategic evaluation agenda the government has presented, and the legal obligation that the government has to provide a proper substantiation of each policy or legislative proposal, to sort of mirror that, Parliament has created the instrument of scientific assessment. And it means that it's an instrument that the committees, the permanent committees in Parliament can use to assess the policy goals, the expected effectiveness, efficiency of policy instruments, financial consequences, and the planned evaluation, so the evaluation plan. The idea is that when the government presents a legislative or a policy proposal to Parliament, a committee can decide to have a scientific assessment, and then two scientists from different universities are being asked to do this assessment. These need to be scientists that have not been involved in the proposal, so they should not have been in advisory committees or anything that the government has used in preparing the proposal. And the result of their assessment is collected in a standard form. There it is, that you see here on the screen. It can only be 4 pages long. So it means that the scientists are challenged to write down their findings very concisely. And it has a number of standard items that are sort of being scored by these scientists, and also there's also obviously an explanation to that as well. And the idea is that when the form is ready, the scientists will present their findings in a technical briefing to Parliament, which is usually also open to the public. Now, this is something that's being used more and more. We've had a number of examples already over the past years, on the Energy Act or Money Laundering Act, defense policy. So a very wide range of policy items where this is being used. Moving on to another instrument, the idea of legislative rapporteurs. Now, here in the European Parliament, this seems like something being very obvious, that you have rapporteurs on the legislative proposal. That is not something that was very common in our parliament, and I think in many national parliaments. We did have the instrument of rapporteurs in other situations, on the budget, for example. But on legislation, this is a new development, which was created 2 years ago, based again on a report of a political working group, who said we need to have, as a parliament, a better grip on legislation, and not just wait until a legislative proposal is being presented to Parliament and then start to work on it. And how to do this in a parliament with many political groups. The idea is to ask, in practice, two members in the committee, one from a coalition party, one from an opposition party, to work together and to work on this bill. The working group that designed this new instrument saw 3 areas where these legislative rapporteurs could have a meaningful role. In the stage before the introduction of the bill in Parliament, they could analyze the draft bill that's being published on the internet, the consultation responses, do some comparative work perhaps, analyze academic publications, so on. In the legislative phase, rapporteurs can focus on specific aspects of a bill that are of interest to all members, so to say. So certain quality aspects. Is it Is it a bill that can actually be implemented? Can executive agencies actually take up this new responsibility? What is the impact on citizens? And do this in a non-political way, so something that can help all members in their legislative work. And then after, and that is, I guess, for you, the most interesting stage for this conference, the post-legislative stage. Once a bill has been adopted and is implemented, the government, as part of its increased focus on review and on evaluation, has committed to do an early implementation review 1 year after a bill has been has entered into force. And that is, again, that's a moment for Parliament again to take up the work again and to look at did this bill actually do what we expected from a parliamentary review in practice. So again, that is a moment where rapporteurs can come in again. This is, since it's a fairly new instrument, not something that we've seen so far. So it's a bit too early, I guess, but we have seen an increasing number of rapporteurs being appointed by committees. So I would expect them to, at some point, get involved in the post-legislative evaluation phase as well. So we've had 14 rapporteurships on major bills so far. And there's a support team, so to say, from our department, a legislative analyst, a knowledge coordinator, but also a clerk, an animation specialist will be involved in supporting these rapporteurs, also from a non-political perspective. And then finally, two sort of interrelated, you can say, instruments which have something in it of strategic planning. The first is the committee knowledge agenda, something that we've been using, the committees have been using for a couple of years now. And every year, each committee will draw up knowledge agenda items or policy areas that the committee wants to increase its knowledge on. This is obviously a very sort of a free kind of agenda, so committees can focus on legislation that is expected later that year, but it can also be much more broader, much more future-oriented. And then finally, strategic committee planning meetings, something, again, a new instrument that we've been using now for a year and a half, I think. Normally, committees will meet every 2 weeks to discuss the current agenda, to see what legislation is on the agenda, what has to be done in the next couple of weeks, so to say. But to take a step back and to look more broadly at what is coming at us over the next year or so. Committees now meet once or twice a week and discuss the legislative agenda or the policy agenda amongst themselves. It's usually a closed meeting, so members can really get together and look ahead and make plans for how are we going to actually deal with the number of bills or policy proposals that will be coming at us next this coming period. So rounding up, these are 4 new sort of instruments which you can sort of place in the policy cycle at various points. You can have a discussion on whether these are the points where they are actually being used right now, or where they can also have a use or a purpose in the future. These are perhaps some interesting instruments, and I'd be interested to hear how other parliaments are developing, are innovating in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandor. Very interesting presentation. I just have one small question for you on the scientific assessments. You said they're only done sometimes and for certain topics, but are they also done for social science as well, or just more?
Yeah, it could be on any bill or any proposal that the government presents to Parliament. But it's up to a committee to decide whether or not they want to use this instrument. Obviously, the idea is not to sort of redo everything that has already been done by the government or by all sorts of advisory bodies. So it's more of a check on, is this up to standard, and is this what the government has promised to do in terms of substantiation, motivation, impact assessments.
Okay, so not to introduce new elements then?
No.
Okay, because I was also thinking about foresight. It could also perhaps bring in a foresight element through these reports, but has that been done?
Not that I know of, but this is, again, my colleague would have been in a very good place to answer this question, but that there's room, obviously. If you need to look at policy goals can have a very short-term, but also a much more future-oriented look. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And we will move now to another parliamentary setting, which is the European Parliament. And Susanna, my colleague here on the left, is a policy analyst at the Ex-Post Evaluation Unit in the EPRS. She is trained as a lawyer, and she is a specialist in the EU Better Lawmaking Framework with emphasis on ex-post evaluation and oversight. Today, she will share with us an overview of this work and also share some key insights and also some challenges. So thank you, Susanna. Here, let me give you the clicker.
Okay. Thank you, Minna. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk to this audience about how we conduct ex-post evaluation in the European Parliament. The only constant in life is change. Fits well to our times, yet we have to go back to Heraclitus or even more further back in history to find its origin. The only constant is change also applies to the body of EU legislation, which is constantly adopted, amended, revised, and repealed according to policy needs and priorities. Ex-post evaluation looks at whether EU Act has delivered the anticipated change, and when doing that, it looks at what has been achieved and compares it with the original objectives. It has been a real pleasure and inspiring to hear about all the different perspectives of today's panel and also of yesterday's discussions. Yesterday more on foresight so this has been also a conference of learning for me. In my presentation, I focus on ex-post evaluation in the European Parliament and its contribution to learning throughout the policy cycle, and especially on the agenda setting phase. From a practitioner's perspective, I will ask and reply to three questions. What tools does the European Parliament have for ex-post evaluation? How does the EPRS support committees work in this field? And then what role retrospective evaluation plays in agenda setting. Let me start with the tools. What instruments does Parliament have for ex-post evaluation? The main instrument is the own initiative implementation report. This is 1 out of 5 types of own initiative reports. It informs about implementation and transposition of EU legislation, international agreements, and soft law instruments, as well as spending programs. It is drafted by the relevant committee, the standing committee, and then voted in plenary. And this informs about Parliament's opinions on issues of EU integration, and also it contains a list of often very concrete actions and calls for action. To launch this kind of report requires a broad political consensus. And although often overshadowed by debates that relate to more legislative procedures and are more dominant on the political conversation, the own initiative reports and the implementation reports specifically are very important tools to inform and to support Parliament's ex post evaluation, scrutiny role and also agenda setting. Just to give you two examples of implementation reports done recently. So one is on ambient air quality directives, and the other one on recovery and resilient facility. In terms of other retrospective tools, Parliament can set up temporary special committees, or inquiry committees, and special committees can be on any policy area, whereas inquiry committees on maladministration of EU law or suspected maladministration of the implementation of EU law. Typically, these take a backward-looking approach in order to draw lessons for further actions and also give this call for further revision or amendments. So now we know the tools, own initiative implementation reports, and also the special or inquiry committees. Let us now turn to how EPRS supports committees in this work. A dual approach is characteristics for parliamentary evaluation activities since the creation of EPRS and dedicated ex post evaluation unit in the Parliament's own administration, and this is our unit. And so the political work of members in the committees is supported by impartial and factual studies drafted in-house. These studies, let me now walk you through how this happens in concrete terms. So these studies are tailor-made for the needs of committees, and they are drafted by in-house policy analysts where possible and by external experts where necessary. In terms of methods, the Commission Better Regulation Guidelines and Toolbox give guidance also to Parliament evaluations, but the exact methods are always decided on case-by-case basis. Besides these studies, we also publish very short briefings on all legislative initiatives, on all legislation that is to be revised according to the Commission work programme. Then we also publish a set of rolling checklists to inform committees on what kind of information is and should be available for their evaluation needs. And this rolling checklist, I mentioned just two, one on evaluation in the European Commission and then another one on review clauses. So now, yes, and just I want to point out that these internal research functions are, of course, not the only source of evidence. So committees may also refer to other sources of evidence, organize fact-finding missions and hearings and public debates with citizens and civil society. And of course, this evidence does not determine the politicians' choices. It informs them about evidence available. Now we have seen the tools and the support of EPRS. So let me now turn to the last point. What role does ex post evaluation play in agenda setting? So it is, of course, the Commission's duty as the executive to ensure and indeed enforce correct transposition and implementation of EU legislation. But the European Parliament has a strong interest in knowing the effects and concrete results of legislation it has adopted. So implementation reports and other ex post evaluation serve this purpose. And in practice, Parliament's evaluations are often reactions to citizens' concerns or Commission legislative priorities, and they intend to inform or influence the preparation of amending legislation. So hence they support Parliament in its all roles as the co-legislator, as the budgetary authority, and as a scrutiny body to keep the Commission accountable. So now let me help you to see the mechanism through which implementation reports are impactful. Most importantly, in accordance to interinstitutional agreements, Commission is committed to take into account the priorities expressed by Parliament. And Commission is expected to follow up to Parliament's own initiative resolutions within 3 months after their adoption. And this is to inform Parliament on actions taken or no action taken in response to its request. Then a structured, ongoing discussion and dialogue between Commission, Council and the Parliament takes place to prepare the Commission annual work programme. And this is a place to systematically take a look on legislation that should be proposed, amended or revised. And for their part, the findings of implementation reports and other ex post evaluation, they feed into this dialogue. Yes, so, and in turn, of course, to this timing aspect in terms to have maximum impact. So the Parliament's evaluation findings should feed as early as possible to the legislative cycle, ideally in the planning of the work programme, or then if you think at individual legislative files, preparation of the evaluation or preparation of the impact assessment. Then later on in the legislative cycle, these findings during the legislative procedure, they support committee deliberations and the amendments, possible amendments made. Here I would just like to highlight also Parliament's strong view. It has expressed that the crisis-triggered emergency decision-making, of which we have seen a lot in previous years, should also undergo appropriate and timely ex post scrutiny. So let me conclude by coming back to the idea expressed at the beginning that the only constant is change. So for its part, implementation reports analyze this change and draw conclusions on it. Why? It is to keep the body of EU legislation relevant and efficient also in the future. And with my presentation, I hope to have also shed light on how EPRS supports the work of committees and also how this illustrates Parliament's commitment to evidence-based policy making and also how it has been institutionalized during the past years and especially the past decade. I thank you for your attention for now, and I turn to Mina and I ask, do I have a time to explain an example? Okay, good.
Thanks a lot, Susanna. That was super. That leaves us about 15 minutes for questions. So perhaps we can come to the example also. Let's see what questions there are. And I'd also like to mention also today is International Women's Day, as many of you know, and it's a pleasure to be on a gender balanced panel and to see a gender balanced audience here. So thank you very much. And also to mention two ladies, Akohe, who's over here, and Virginia, who are over here and who are helping also with the event. So thank you very much. And now to all of you, what questions do we have? Oh, great. We have some hands in the room and online as well. No? Okay, so let's start with the room. Why don't we go on this side? Yeah.
Hello, Maciek Krzysztofowicz from the Joint Research Center of the Commission Foresight Unit. What I wanted to ask is, you have also mentioned, some of you, that the evaluation is really getting a grasp of what is going on the ground. And it's also this treasure trove of information of what is happening. And this relates very well to the first stages of strategic foresight, which is horizon scanning, looking at what is emerging and looking what new questions can we ask. Yet, as it was also mentioned regarding the crisis, basically the questions that evaluations ask about relevance, about efficiency, efficacy, and so on, coherence, are from a certain perspective good, but do not actually reply to those things that we may want to know about the future. And whereas this information is out there, it's in the fact-finding missions everywhere, it is not passed on because it does not seem relevant. And in fact, you may want to know from many of those reports, what is the new things? What are the new questions we should be asking? What are the emerging things? But we don't find them in the final reports, and we don't find them anywhere in the actual process. So my question to all of you, in a way, is how to actually turn a kind of more sterile evaluation process that we see now into something that is much more forward-looking, in the sense that it looks at what is emerging. What do we see as experience from those projects that is new, that is different? What are the new questions that we should be asking, and how to raise those questions through evaluations? Thanks.
Wow, excellent question. Maybe we take a second one, because I saw another hand over here, and then we'll yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all presenters. It was very interesting to hear from you. I was particularly intrigued by the questions raised by Professor Stephenson. And and one would think that it's the most logical thing to do, that you carefully assess, what is in place before you take any action. And to come back to the metaphor that Mina used, that you look at the house you have and you think what works, what doesn't work before you tear it down or before you start renovating it. My questions goes to all speakers. I was wondering, considering what we heard yesterday in the panel on Foresight, how can evaluation be used to make policies more flexible? And Professor Stephenson, you already hinted at this concept or idea of experimentation. So I'd be interested, to hear a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Great, we have two super questions. So shall we pass the microphone around? Anyone want to volunteer to go first? Yeah.
Thank you. I will answer try to contribute to the first question about how to make evaluations useful. Basically, I think one of the key aspects is that we should not see the classical evaluation criteria as a straitjacket. The aim is not to have an evaluation, but to make a change within the organization. So I think one good principle is also to adapt these criteria depending on what is the real need. Sometimes you don't need these criteria, sometimes you need others to be looked at. And I think what's key is also to link between the ex-ante assessment and the ex-post evaluation. And one way to link is probably to ask against the same criteria and to check whether the ex-ante assumptions that were put in place prove to be true or not. I mean, closing the feedback loop probably means asking the same questions again and reassessing whether we had the right metrics, whether we made the right choice, and how we can learn from that. So my plea is to not use the criteria as a straitjacket, adapt depending on the context and the intended users, and also to be much more message-driven in our evaluations. On our side, we've stopped drafting evaluation reports along relevance, effectiveness, efficiency. This talks to evaluators, to our peer reviewers, but it doesn't mean anything to a decision maker. What's important is to use this as material, material that is then used to provide the actual message about how these different criteria combine. These criteria are there to delineate the different elements of a policy. And then you have evidence and you have to tell a story based on that. And the story has to be much more message-driven, much more impactful. So basically we use consultants, journalists, to help us derive from these criteria an actual message for decision makers. The usability of the evaluation is absolutely key, and I think that's something that we have to improve.
I noted you used the word sterile actually to describe a lot of ex post evaluation, which was an interesting term. And how can we make it more future oriented? I mean, talking about methodologies, Chapter 8 of the Better Regulation Toolbox actually outlines a number of methodologies for analysing impacts, evaluations, fitness checks, cost-benefit analysis, multi-criteria decision analysis. Should we be incorporating SWOT analysis, explicitly identifying opportunities and threats for the future in ex-post evaluations? Maybe that also, I mean, I'd never heard this term horizon scanning until yesterday. Should we be offering methodologies for horizon scanning to external consultants we're paying to do these evaluation research? Maybe there needs to be more guidance there in terms of how we do future-oriented evaluations.
Maybe I had also on the first question about how can we be more forward-looking with the current tools that we have, and as the colleague from the GRC knows, so we are really bound to follow very strictly the better regulation guidelines and the tool and the toolboxes. The way we see it in a very pragmatic way, for instance, and I mentioned in my presentation, through the questionnaires that it put to the public, there's always a way to put more forward-looking questions, and we do that. So we really ask about that, not so much about things, implementation, but put more broad, open-ended questions about forward-looking elements. And I think this is something that works in that direction. The same goes when we are contracting with an external study. I mean, also can always, we have some leeway and some room of maneuver to have some parts that could be more forward-looking. So for me, being pragmatic, using what we have to do and what the tools that we need that we have and we need to follow up, always bringing these forward-looking, it's really good. And moreover, this is so rich, the fact that we consult for many weeks the citizens, civil society, I mean, everyone. So it's always good to use this opportunity to put this forward-looking part.
That's great. So there's a straitjacket, but there's some room for maneuver. That's excellent. Sandor, you had any reply? Susanna, I was thinking in the Parliament, we're not bound by the Better Regulation Guidelines, no? So we don't have the straitjacket. There is some flexibility. And is the example you were thinking to share before, does it respond to the question from the JRC, or? Please feel free to reply. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just say something on the flexibility. So the Better Regulation Toolbox and Guidelines, they do steer also the work of Parliament in terms of evaluation activities. And we do take into account everything that Commission has published and all publicly available information. And on that, how to make it more flexible, maybe we could see the monitoring clauses and the review clauses to have enough data available to do evaluation and to do it on a faster pace than we are able to do it now, and maybe think about how these instruments could be used. And this is the viewpoint of a practitioner who always thinks about how evaluation is possible, so we need to have data in order to evaluate.
Very good point about data. So we have time maybe for a couple more questions. Wolfgang, it's still okay, right? Oh, great. We have one here, that's right. The mic over here. And then one more in the corner, so two. And then we'll have a quick round of replies. Yeah?
I have two questions for the colleague of the Parliament for the Netherlands. I was impressed by the innovations introduced in your Parliament and would like to know more about this. I have two questions about the system of the experts' notes that are given during the consideration of the bill. Have you made an impact assessment on impact assessment? I mean, how far are they used, really used in the legislative decision-making? And the second point, you mentioned that this very interesting system of legislative rapporteurs, well, the rapporteurs are involved also in the pre-legislative stage. Does this mean that they participate, because most of the times the bills are introduced by the government initiatives. Does this mean that they are involved in the preparation of the bills by the government? Because this sounds quite unusual and it's very interesting experience.
Thank you very much for these very good questions. The first one was on the scientific assessments and what is their impact and are they being used? No, we haven't done our own sort of evaluation of the use of this instrument. It's still fairly new, so we don't have that much sort of data. And it's also something it's difficult to measure what kind of impact this has, but when it comes to very clearly, is it being used in a parliamentary debate or in a other parliamentary setting, then the answer is well, it varies obviously, but the answer is yes. We've seen that it's been a part of some major debates. It has, in that sense, has an impact on the parliamentary process. To what extent it has an impact on the policy process, that's I don't have data on that, but it's definitely an interesting thing to take up at some point, to look back, to an ex-post evaluation. On the legislative rapporteurs, yes, they can be involved in the pre-legislative stage. So far, they have not been involved in the actual drafting process on the government side. That's not exactly. That's not all. It's not the. That's not really what was the idea of it. The idea is to help Parliament to prepare for the legislative phase, to make sure that you have your knowledge position up on a sufficient level once the bill actually enters Parliament and has to be debated on when there's usually very short time span. So it's much more about what kind of information do we need as a Parliament later on to be able to actually do the legislative work in a proper way. Yeah.
Great, thanks. It's wonderful to see these exchanges and learning. Wolfgang and Aurora, do we have time for one more question? It's 11:57. Okay, great. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura Panella. Ciao, Lucas. One question. If we are confronted with several crises that require quick reaction, how do you think we can readapt, if necessary, this better regulation process to be able to ensure its quality from one side and quick reaction from the other side? Thank you.
Big question. Anyone would like to take that? Well, I think that the point made by JRC certainly feeds in, that perhaps we need more of a future perspective in the evaluation in order to anticipate what comes. So that would be my contribution. Raquel, great.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I fully agree with what Laura said. I think we are all on this together because the recent years that really proves that we need to have more flexibility to readapt. My personal view is that we are bound again with all these things to follow the better regulation when it comes to the core evaluations. But besides that, we can do many other things, depending if we have the means or not. But we, of course, in my case, since as I explained, I have a program, so a lot also requires flexibility and the use of the regulation in itself. In our case, our regulation allows us to be responsive for emergency needs, But of course, I'm mentioning this, but then we are not anymore speaking about evaluation products and evaluation cycle. When it comes to the evaluation and to have more feedback, to adapt through this poly-crisis world that we live in, I believe that we need to work outside the framework of what is this imposition in terms of the strict ex-ante, midterm, ex-post, and to have more permanent ways to have these own mechanisms, the own feedback mechanisms from the things that we do. Again, maybe a bit of a deja vu, but constant surveys with our audiences, with our stakeholders, I think it's a good way to keep this evaluation keep going and to keep getting feedback. Yeah, I would say basically have a very robust way of own mechanisms to evaluate permanently and to get then these this feedback to feed into the standard ways that we evaluate.
Thanks a lot. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
And just building on that and coming back to the question from the back of the room about experimentation, there is perhaps this tension between harmonizing procedures and approaches and practice, harmonizing evaluation criteria, but yet the need to continually innovate and experiment. And I think one thing we need to ensure is that within this evaluation industry, that we still encourage new entrants to the market rather than seeing the same usual suspects coming forward. I know the Commission is extremely eager to find new evaluation teams and new researchers who are properly trained in evaluation methods, and that's something we really must encourage in order to keep evaluation dynamic and surprising.
Great point. Emmanuel, you also? Yes?
Maybe just to mention and to complement your point that it's important indeed to be able to adjust the toolbox that we have. In the context of the COVID crisis, for example, we undertook a rapid assessment of the crisis response. Being rapid for an evaluation function is really complicated indeed. It took 9 months, which is for us extremely rapid, because indeed we have to keep the rigor, and it still has to be an evaluation. So it still has to build on a very strict and rigorous approach, has to be consulted to be impactful. But playing with that, adapting the work program to this new context, and using AI, that's what we try to use as well, for data mining, sentiment analysis, using the available tools to be able to collect more quickly and with a much broader base what exists in terms of knowledge on the issue is already something useful. So there are many ways and really opportunities with AI in particular, if it's well controlled, to be able to more quickly grasp knowledge from a much broader set of evidence. And that can be, I think, useful in such context.
Wow, and topic for another conference too, Wolfgang, I think. Huh? So thank you very much to all our speakers. This concludes session 3. And thanks to all of you in the audience for your participation. And I'll hand it over now to Wolfgang, our next speaker. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome to stay on here. I think you make a beautiful picture. Indeed, this question of being fast is one which we also struggle with, in particular also on the ex-ante side, when you're supposed to do some supplementary impact assessment on something, and policymakers want to know everything immediately and everything, ideally. So that's a struggle, and it's probably a struggle which we're going to see more often as the policy cycle is going to become faster on the one hand. And we speak about this multi-crisis. That also means that we will have a crisis occasionally bumping up, which we have not been prepared properly yet, in spite of all our efforts. And then also we need to react, and we had this before. And then we cannot do all these checks beforehand. But then I think ex-post evaluation is becoming even more important in these cases.